Graduate Network Lunch Club, where people ultimately just meet other people who are working on things similar to themselves that they're interested in, and a good opportunity to meet other people. And we have decided to put like a theme to each one and do a quick talk at the beginning. Like my role here, I'll MC. I'm also work in venture capital, so I'm open to taking questions. But myself, Kate, and Vav will have a quick discussion about what we do, how we got into it, and what we like about it, and then we'll open up for a Q&A if any people have any questions. And then after probably about half an hour, or depending on how many questions there are, we will split up into breakout rooms, and people will get to meet the other people who are attending this, because I think most of the fun at the IGN events is actually getting to meet new people that hopefully when we're all out of a Zoom world and drinking pints in person, you'll be able to recognize them. So without further ado, my name is Paddy. I'm involved in the Irish Graduate Network since its launch. I work in Elkstone. I have done so since the summer of 2018. So I'm an associate there at the moment. We invest 250K up to 2 million in seed and Series A stage startups, predominantly seed, which basically means either the first or second round of funding a startup may raise. We invest in all sorts of tech startups. Only ones we don't invest in are life sciences based or semiconductors startups. So we focus on Ireland, the UK, and the US, sometimes in Germany too. But yeah, I have absolutely loved working in venture capital. I think it's a super interesting job. And I might let Kate and Vav introduce themselves. And in Vav's case, he might talk a little bit about ACT.
Do you want to go ahead? We'll have a split up the Elkstone voice.
Yeah. So hi guys, I'm Vaibhav Tandon. Despite my name, I'm a proud Corkonian. So I've been working with ACT Venture Capital for the last year and a half now. And what we do, we're similar to Elkstone. We are kind of seed and Series A focused fund where we predominantly invest in Irish startups. We also do investment in Europe as well. In our seed fund, we invest anywhere up to 100K to 750K. And in the Series A fund, we can do anywhere up to 1 million to 10 million. And then in terms of the sectors, we're quite sector agnostic. But again, similar to Elkstone, we kind of do everything which is exciting other than life science based. So yeah, over to you, Kate.
I won't do an Elkstone spiel, but I might just give a bit of my background, and it'll stem into how I ended up working in venture capital, which I think might be some of the questions that will come through. But I started off studying law and business in Trinity. So up until last year, I just graduated this year and joined Elkstone in September. But during my time at college, I initially thought I would take that law route. I had, I'd done an internship in Arthur Cox and thought that was the route I would take, but I was very involved in the entrepreneurial society in Trinity. So I was running the speaker series in there in my third year, and then I was president in my final year. And I suppose that really opened up my eyes to the kind of the business side of what my degree was, but also in terms of the opportunities that lie within that space. I started just meeting lots of different entrepreneurs, through the speaker series that we ran, but also student entrepreneurs, people who had ideas and wanted to turn it into reality. So the great thing about working with Tess is that we had programs for it. We ran an incubator program, which basically allowed 10 different student startup teams to join and had kind of mentorship each week on a Tuesday, as well as small amounts of funding to put into their company as they went along, and that is where I met Elkstone. So Elkstone was the sponsor of the incubator program, and I met both Paddy and Vlad through that process, and learned more about Elkstone. It's where I first became familiar with them. But before I got there, during my time at Trinity, in my final year, went over to San Francisco on the Silicon Valley Bank trek, which is where they basically bring 20 students from around the world over to meet, interesting people who are working in the venture space in Silicon Valley. So different fund managers, as well as different entrepreneurs. So that definitely opened my eyes to the possibilities of venture capital, Silicon Valley being the really hot space where money is given for people with ideas and nothing else in a lot of instances, but a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. So that definitely gave me an inkling that it was a space I'd like to work in. And I suppose I started to realize that what I was doing as a hobby or as enjoyment, working with entrepreneurs, working with startups, could actually be a job. So that's where it became interesting for me. I then went and was working in Consensus blockchain company in Dublin, but during my final year, and it's stemming into the summer then, and then I wrapped up there in June and started in Elkstone in September. So that's a bit of my background.
And I guess like one thing people always ask me is about breaking into venture capital, and I guess Vav, you have a pretty interesting story, because kind of like Kate, networking is a key important part of it. So you might talk about your transition from the MTMA over to ACT.
Yeah. I think it's one of the most questions I get asked all the time. How did you get into venture? And I think if you ask 10 VCs how they got in, you get 10 different answers. There's no correct path to venture. I think a lot of it's to luck and to your own networking, what you do with it. So a bit about my background, I did business and economics in Trinity, and then the plan was to take a year in, go traveling. This is pre-COVID, obviously. And then I quickly learned that, you need to have money to do that. So that plan quickly failed. And then I started applying for graduate jobs, and I ended up doing the corporate finance graduate program with the NTMA, which was a rotation, 3 different departments. One of them was being the Irish Strategic Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the Irish Sovereign Wealth Fund. The thing about sovereign wealth funds is that these countries have billions to invest in. In terms of the Irish Sovereign Wealth Fund, it's a 20 billion fund, and that's divided into 2 different sectors. There's a global portfolio, which is dealing with equities and bonds, and the other side of their fund is direct investments, where they would do direct investments in companies, or they would do direct investments in funds, for example, like ACT. When I was in ISIF, my manager in there, he was the head of venture capital. So his role essentially was to monitor all the VCs in Ireland, and also to look at other European or US VCs who are looking to target the Irish market. So I kind of got a very broad exposure to what venture capital was, and also to do direct deals and stuff. Because I was also part of the venture capital and private equity team inside there. But to be honest, when I was in college, I didn't know really what venture capital was. There was no that this is my passion, that I'm going to go and become a VC. And it kind of just, I guess it kind of fell into my path by my connections with James. But one of my roles in ISIF was to monitor the VC funds and see how they're doing. What we typically do is we write reports to our investors, and then my job was to kind of go through these reports and analyze what's happening in these companies, and to kind of present that to the team. But as part of the graduate program, my manager, he wanted me to just pick a random company in our fund and then just go shadow them for a few days. And then I kind of just quickly looked at our fund, and I saw ACT Venture Capital there, and what the guys were doing I thought was quite interesting. And so yeah, I just told James that these guys, they seem pretty cool, venture capital, let's see what that's about. Then yeah, I kind of just went there and shadowed the guys for a few days, and it was really exciting. Like, you're meeting with entrepreneurs on a daily basis. You meet people who are just super intelligent, they're really passionate, and trying to feed that into that. So after my when I finished my shadowing, I came back, and then my contract with the NTMA was coming towards an end, and then kind of had to decide that, do I want to work with the NTMA or should I go somewhere else? Like, NTMA, I think, is a great place for a graduate program. They have loads of different areas, and they do really good rotation graduate programs and really good training as well. But it's still a state-run business at the end of the day, so it's extremely slow. And as I said, you're dealing with billions, and that just went completely over my head. And I kind of really want to learn that, how does from a startup scene, how does the whole embryonic stage work? And then my time with ACT, I thought was really interesting. So I kind of decided that I'm going to look elsewhere. So at the time, there was another job opening for another VC fund. So I kind of looked at that and applied to that. It went well. But then during the same time, back in my mind, I remember how good time I had with ACT. So I emailed the managing partner here, clearly didn't hear anything back. A month later, emailed him again, didn't hear anything back. But then just as a last hazard, when I actually got offered the contract with the other VC fund, I was just said that, oh, I have an offer here, just sorry to know you, and what do you think? Is there any opening possibility? And as soon as he saw that, I got an email back in 30 minutes about, oh, why is this guy being approached and what's, so yeah, we kind of had a very quick chat and then kind of went through the process and stuff, which was pretty quick, I guess. And then, yeah, then I've been with Acme for the last year and a half now.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson in negotiation for everyone, just to have something going into the room and be willing to walk away. But I think it's a pretty cool story. And you did touch on like what's exciting about the job. And for me, I definitely think we're quite lucky in that every day you get to meet founders of businesses who are trying to make you excited about their business. So especially during COVID, when it's a pretty bleak time otherwise, we're quite fortunate that people are trying to get us excited every day. And definitely my favorite part about the job is meeting people more impressive than myself and trying to impress me with their company and just hearing about their ideas and how they look at the world. Kate, you might say what you've enjoyed about the job?
Yeah, I suppose, firstly, I think that's something that's great about the job is how you touched on it, but how much, human interaction there is. And I'm definitely a social animal. So, having that opportunity to really interact with lots of people and to be building relationships with different founders is a really interesting and exciting part of the job. It's also fast paced, I suppose. You really need to be understanding pretty quickly whether there's it's an opportunity you're going to progress with or not. So a learning curve, but it's nice to be in that kind of fast paced environment. And I suppose another thing that stems into that is the fact that we're looking at so many things. So one day you might be looking at insurtech and the next day you're looking at prop tech or whatever it might be. So you do really get that really broad view of what's going on in the world. And I think it definitely satisfies like a curiosity that I have for the world, everything that's going on in general. So I've really enjoyed that part of the job. And similar to what you said, Paddy, but Paddy, I think you should also give us your leeway into a segue into venture as well to give us a full picture.
Yeah, so I was pretty much, I decided to do commerce in UCD when I was 18 for a little more reason than I had no idea what I wanted to do for a career. I just knew it involved business in some capacity. So I was not one of those people who knew right out the bat that I was going to go into venture capital, quite similar to Vav. I actually barely knew what venture capital was until I did an internship in KPMG in my first summer. And then after second year, I did an internship in Matheson in the M&A department. So I was actually doing law. I watched a lot of Suits and decided maybe I wanted to be a lawyer. So thankfully, Matheson took me in, and oddly, we actually represented PayPal Ventures on a venture capital deal. And I just remember thinking, this is really cool. Because I had to learn a little about the company that was being invested in, and I was like, I'd love to be doing investments. So then I got into my head that, okay, I'm going to do something to do with investments. And I thought I wanted to do private equity. So I did a bunch of other internships. And then when I was in final year in college, I got increasingly drawn towards the startup world. So throughout college, my part-time job was I essentially did spread betting as opposed to actually working a real job, because I basically understood how the maths of bookmakers worked and was making more money than was my part-time job, so I actually quit it. So I always was one of those people very driven to work for myself in some capacity. So that kind of drew me towards the startup world, because I was like, you watch any movie about Mark Zuckerberg or any of them guys, and everyone who was driving to build something was doing it out of the startup world. So I entered a couple of startup competitions, won a Techstars one. So I was also doing an internship in a private equity firm, which was looking to invest in, I guess, like burrito shops and signpost companies. And I was like, okay, investing is cool, but startups is cooler. So how do I merge investing and startups? So then obviously Elkstone, the opportunity came along they were looking to hire a junior person, pretty nondescript definition of what they were looking for. So I applied, and I guess I have done a bit of everything, and I have tested the waters with lots of things, and this is what I've decided to do. I had a semi-entrepreneurial background I had ran a one-man business that was quite successful throughout college. And I applied, did 3-4 interviews, and I became the first person in their 20s that was in Elkstone at the time. And it's funny, Elkstone has grown up a lot since, and we have hired a lot more people in their 20s, Kate being a great example, and Vlad also, who's hiding behind his camera being turned off. But yeah, so I kind of didn't follow the cookie cutter, like I'm going to be an investment banker, then a venture capitalist type path. I did internships, I think I did 5 or 6 of them in a little bit of everything, and it drew me towards, I want to do venture. And I also decided, after working in big companies like KPMG, Matheson, etc., I wanted to work in a small company. And I wanted to be somewhere where I could make as many decisions as possible, be they good decisions or bad decisions, because I thought ultimately where I want to be in my career is running my own business and making lots of decisions. And I thought the best experience there was to do that in a small company. So Elkstone at the time had 17-ish people. Our team had about 3 people. And really, I've absolutely loved that since. And, you know, I think Kate can attest to, you definitely are thrown in at the deep end, and you finish a deal, you think you're great, you get a pat on the back, and the first thing that's said to you on Monday morning is, what's the next deal? So there is no rest for the wicked, but I definitely love the aspect of making decisions in the job and, you know, learning by doing. And another part of the job that I love is, after you've invested in a company, actually watching those companies go from, like, you know, 2 guys with a laptop to hiring tens and hundreds of people. And like, I think a good example in the Elkstone portfolio is like, Let's Get Checked. I think when Elkstone invested in the company, they had about 5 staff. They'll have 653 by the end of this year. So I guess getting to be part of that process of watching people build companies and see that live is definitely what I love. And it's funny that I had a very non-linear path of getting here, but I'm definitely of the opinion now where I would only leave venture to join or start a startup. So yeah, I've definitely got the bug and not leaving anytime soon. But I guess, Vav, you might touch on what you actually really enjoy about the job and how that might differ from what you were doing in the NTMA previously.
Yeah. So I think with NTMA, it's funny how with the NTMA you're looking at a broad fund. For example, with ACT, we have around 30 companies in our current portfolio, whereas with NTMA as an LP. So just to explain what an LP is, we usually get money from other investors, such as what you call an LP, and sovereign wealth funds would be an example. Typically in the US, it's quite a different model. You'll have endowment funds, you'll have banks who deploy their capital to you. But as an LP, we would just look at your hardcore numbers of, okay, what's sort of the return profile, how they're performing, and also with the wealth fund, what they also have the direct investment side of things. So they would also look at our companies and they would think that, okay, which of these companies have the potential to be global leaders, so they could also potentially direct invest in those companies as well. For example, like Wave, and they've invested in Movidius and stuff as well. So it shows that they will use your network in your portfolio to invest directly into them as well. But then it's quite different with working in a venture fund, because you're dealing with companies on a daily basis, different companies. And to echo what Kate said about, it's, if you like working on long-term projects, it is long-term in a sense, but it's not at all the same time, because if you do a deal, as Paddy outlined, you see the company grow from 2 employees to 600 employees, and then you see them scaling from Ireland to London, to New York, to Silicon Valley and stuff. So you really see the full process. So that's a long-term process. But in terms of the deal side of things, the deal flow, it's very short-term process, because you're, at the end of the day, you're competing against other venture funds. And if a company is good, they'll get their funding raised from, if it's an Irish VC or if it's a global VC. So you have to be quite quick with your process. So yeah, sorry, I think I lost train of thought to your question there. But I think with what we do typically is, yeah, you would look at companies on a regular basis, try to move as fast as you can, and then trying to come to an investment decision as soon as possible. I think, for example, Harvard Business Review did a study there last month about how a VC decision operates. So I think in general, a typical VC would see 600 deals in a year, and out of those 600, only 30 would go down where you meet the senior management team, and then from those 30, maybe 10 would meet the investment committee, and out of those 10, 3 might get a term sheet, and then even after that, only maybe 1.5 would get an investment. So it's very, very select few who actually do end up getting funding. because as a fund, you're taking a huge opportunity cost by not deploying your capital to somebody else. So you really have to be careful of who you invest in and your reasons behind it, and also from an LP point of view, backing your strategy, because your investors have backed you because of the strategy you have. For example, if we are a B2B software focused firm, and if we start doing investment in life science, our LP is going to be like, why are you doing this? It's not the reason why we gave you money. And when it comes down to raising our next fund, they would just be like, you completely steered away from your strategy, and then that's your business. The VC fund is closed. So it's quite important to follow your strategy that you've outlined to your LPs, as an entrepreneur outlines his strategy to the VCs. So at the end of the day, we are a startup.
And I guess I'm going to ask one more question to each of you before we open up for Q&A from everyone else. But 30-second answer tops. Which company in your portfolio are you most excited about, and why? I'll let Vav start, just to give Kate time to think, because she's my colleague. And
it's a good question. I think the company that I'm really excited about, it's a deal that I worked on myself. It's a company we've just invested in. It's called InstaMotion. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Kazoo or Cinch in the UK. Kazoo, they sponsor Everton, I think Aston Villa, just as a bit of background to explain. But what Kazoo do, they own used cars, and then they sell them directly to a consumer. For example, we have CarZone, but on CarZone, you can't buy a car directly to your house. You have to go to the dealer and do all the process. But with this company we invested, it's called InstaMotion. What they do, it's very similar to Cinch and Kazoo, where they are the middleman between dealers and the consumer, and you can buy a car directly in 30 minutes. And it's a really interesting area. If you see, there's big companies in US, Carvana, and who are worth I think 2.7 billion, and the German market is huge for used cars. So it's a company that we just invested in. I'm really excited to see how they get on in the future.
And Kate?
I think that the most exciting one at the moment is Let's Get Checked. I think it's maybe the obvious answer, but they're, the space that they're in terms of digital health is such an exciting space, and I think that there's so much more that they can potentially do in terms of what their product offerings are. So I will say that as a safe one, but I also am really excited about I'll choose Unify Ordering, because I think it's an example of a company that's identifying sort of inefficiencies in like logistics and supply chain that are, maybe hidden in a lot of instances, but that have huge value if you can unlock the kind of inefficiencies there. So I think Unify Ordering is a great example of a company doing that, and I think it's an exciting one.
Okay. I am going to, we have a couple that are clearly exciting. I'm going to be biased and just pick one of the deals that I was heavily involved in. So I'm going to say Robotify. And interestingly, when people think of the barriers to starting a company, when we invested, the two founders were 21, and they're both still doing their degrees in DCU. So what the company does is it's a virtual robotics platform for teaching children how to code. And basically, children can play games against each other. I guess the best example is they have a product called RoboDuel. So kids can code robots to essentially play robot wars against each other on the internet, but to teach them how to code while also teaching them to beat up their mate's robot. So I think it's a super exciting company. The two founders are brilliant and very exciting to work with. So yeah, that's my pick is Robotify. So I guess, guys, if anyone has any questions for any of the three of us, please feel free to step up and ask now.
I have one, if that's all right. Nice to meet you, Kate and Vaibhav. We talked a lot today about why you guys really like your job and how you got into it, but I'm still not sure what you do. So my question for you is, what is the sort of venture capital cycle? What is the process that you and your companies go through, and which part of that do you guys do as like the more junior members? Where do you feed into the overall process?
Okay,
Good
I guess I'll take probably. So what we do is essentially end-to-end on the deal. So it's our responsibility to find deals as well as everyone else on the team. So venture capital is a weird job in that most people on the team, be they partners, analysts, associates, principals, whatever, have fairly similar responsibilities. Obviously, it varies to some degree, but ideally find who's working on what's exciting and bring them in for a pitch. We analyze, we meet the founders, we meet the team, we work out what's exciting about it, we look into the market, do all that, investment analysis, etc. We obviously involve subject matter experts. So for example, we're looking at a company at the moment and we've invested into similar companies before. So we've asked both founders of the similar companies for their take. And then we bring the deals forward to our investment committee. We ultimately choose to invest in, similar to Vav, probably we do about 8 to 10 deals a year. And then post-investment, depending on your level of involvement. So an example is like I'm on the board of a couple of companies we've invested in. So I'm very much involved in like every 6 weeks a board meeting with the company, introducing them to potential customers or other angles that we may or may not have through our network. So I guess if I was to summarize the job in 2 words, it's picking in terms of picking the investments and supporting in terms of post-investment. So I guess, Vav, is your life and act quite similar or much differentiation?
I think to your question, Brian, to kind of give you a better understanding. So like a VC fund, typically, like we have 5 funds at the moment, and a single fund usually lasts 10 years. So what I mean by that is at the start of the fund, you need to go and raise capital, like any entrepreneur would go and raise capital. So I guess your role at the start would be to figure out, make the way entrepreneurs make decks for us, we would make decks for our founders. So we were currently working on our 6th fund, so I helped out with my background with working with the NTMA. I had some sort of knowledge of how that kind of process looks like. So I was helping out creating the fundraising deck that we would send out to our LPs and stuff and focusing on our strategy. So I did that bit at the start of the year. So I guess that happens -1 before the fund has even started. And then between the first year to 5 year of the fund, it's called the investment period, where we would go and invest in companies and fill out the portfolio, as Paddy outlined. It'd be quite similar to what we would do. But then also, from my point of view now, I've started getting involved in the legal side of things in terms of term sheets. So you need to have a pretty good understanding of what are the levers that we need for a shareholder to have good control of. So you need to have good understanding of the market trends, the financial analysis, sensitivities, what's kind of happening in the background, what's your cash resilience. But that's kind of just the start of the process where it gets really tricky, which is actually an area where a lot of the deals fall, is the legal side of things, where you just can't come into coherence between you and the CEO of what the legal structure should be like. So the legal side of it's actually quite important as well, which I'm getting my hands dirty on that a bit now. And then, yeah, as Paddy outlined, the next 5 years of fun is all about getting the company to raise more capital, go and raise bigger rounds, and then hopefully at the end of it to exit. And then once they exit, we give back the capital gained to our investors. Hopefully that answers the question.
We have nodding from Brian behind mute. So anyone else have any questions?
Yeah. Hi guys. Sorry if you've already answered this. I kind of joined the call late. I don't know too much about VC, but I'm wondering, is VC really just focused on investing in tech companies, or do you try to diversify a bit? Because some people think, tech's a bit of a bubble. But I know the VC is usually high risk investments. So is that usually tech, or do you even diversify if you're doing high risk stuff?
I think it kind of, sorry, do you want to go?
No, go on, Bob. Take it.
I think it varies. It depends on the fund. For example, we've been around since 1994, so we are quite sector agnostic. So if you think of it this way, if me and Paddy, for example, decide to go raise a fund, it'd be quite difficult for us to raise money for being very fund sector agnostic. You kind of need to be providing some unique proposition to your investors and stuff. For example, this is the reason why we've seen recently in the last few years where there's a lot more focus to VC funds. You have a fintech play focused fund, you have a cybersecurity fund. For us, we would be, because we have the network to kind of gain knowledge in whatever area, we kind of feel comfortable enough being quite sector agnostic. Whereas if you're in a new fund, it might be quite challenging for you to have the expertise to understand if this investment is good or not for me. So typically what happens is somebody who has a cybersecurity background, for let's just say, or a fintech background, that they are the industry experts in this sort of area, and then they can kind of stand up and just do deals solely focused in those particular areas, if that makes sense.
And I might just say, as a summary, I guess, to VC investment strategy at the early stage where we are, like from my minimal experiences of working in private equity, you might do a deal in private equity that's interesting because you can structure it really well. You can negotiate good debt for a leveraged buyout, and you might make money because the deal is structured really well, and you might be only looking to 2 or 3x your money over time. Whereas I think in early stage VC, you're generally talking about looking for a company that can 10x. And I guess that's why there's an overweight on technology, because technology businesses are by far the most disruptive today. And, we might see a company and think, oh, that's a pretty good company. Like the founders could feasibly run a good, profitable business, but it's just not interesting to us because it wouldn't have that outlier potential. So it's funny, I think myself and Kate have discussed this offline, but one of the most difficult parts of the job is differentiating good and great. And I guess because we invest in so few things every year, you really need to be finding as many great as possible.
I would just tag on to that as well. Like, I think, naturally, as Paddy said, when you're looking for that outsized return, tech-enabled companies are most often the way to get there. But it is worth highlighting that, not all venture investments across the board are only tech-focused. I think, even if you look at our portfolio, we have a few. If you look at Miro, so looking at kind of environmentally friendly beauty products, or if you look at something like meat alternatives, they're not strictly technology enabled, but there is something about them that maybe creates a sort of blue ocean opportunity that really lets us get there in our heads in terms of how it might reach that outsized return.
I think Anna had a question.
Yeah, sorry, I was just wondering, how would a company get a pitch with the likes of Elkstone or Act? And could you guys suggest a company, even if you had your eye on a company, or if you heard of one, say through the IGN, who, do they apply, or do you guys approach them, or can you guys suggest who will suggest a company, or would you have your eyes on companies yourselves? The process of just getting a pitch with Elkstone or something.
So it's a bit of everything. So I think in Dublin in particular, and it might be different for ACT, but I think Dublin is so small that if you can't get a warm introduction to the firm, either through someone who knows, say, me, or through someone who knows Kate, then I would question the actual hustle of the founder, given Dublin's such a small place. And a warm introduction, I literally mean is someone who knows me that I semi-trust, being like, oh, Anna's company is quite interesting, you should meet her. But also a lot of we're looking at a deal at the moment, and the founder literally just LinkedIn messaged me. So I guess there are many ways in. There's also deals we have done where I have actively pursued the company because I read about them on the internet and I was like, interesting, let's go find that. But definitely in our firm, if Kate thinks the deal is interesting, it will get the same audience as if I think a deal is interesting, or Alan, our CEO, thinks a deal is interesting. It's really, we just distill what our thesis is internally in the team. And if you're bringing an exciting deal, then it doesn't really matter who is bringing it, as long as they can get the rest of the team excited by it. Vav, you might touch on yourselves.
Yeah, no, it's quite similar. But I guess in terms of your question, how would you get in touch with a VC? It's kind of network again. Simply message on LinkedIn, or even sending a message on the website. But how typically we would see our deals, I think, obviously it's all about, VC is all about networking. And the partners, for example, in ACT, they've been around doing this for 25 years. So they have an enormous network, and they get deals based off just who they are and what they've done in the market so far. Whereas it's challenging, I guess, for myself, Kate and Paddy now, where we're kind of still new to this, so you kind of have to build out your own network. And then I guess the deals kind of come through that, because at the end of the day, it's all about exits, and exits come from deals. So it'd be quite similar to that. And also I think sometimes you might get an M&A house who might approach you about, oh, we're working on X and Y, Z. We think it might work with your strategy. Would you be interested in looking at it? So it's quite diverse, broad range, but in general, it's kind of mostly networks, and then it's kind of cold outbound emails from likes of analysts, associates, to companies and stuff. But in general, yeah.
I think it's interesting as well if you look at, we were looking at where some of our different deals come from, and some of them are introductions from other founders. They, because they understand what we're looking for, they might introduce another founder, or some of them come through, some of our LPs who might introduce us to companies. And then there are instances where, there are particular accelerator programs, et cetera, which might, send deals through us. I mean, it is so much to do with network, but it's also that broader network in terms of the people that we know and who they know. So, I mean, it does all come back to this whole, I know we're here.
So like, it really is a job where you're essentially paid to network, and kind of like both of Kate and Vaibhav touched on, like, it's a weird industry in that it's probably the only asset class where the investee picks the investor. So the best companies will generally have multiple VC firms wanting to invest in them. Whereas I guess if I want to invest in Google stock today, Google doesn't have a say. I can just buy. Whereas in this case, these companies can actively choose, oh, we want to go with ACT or we want to go with Elkstone. So there is that human element of differentiating yourself. And that's, I guess, why networking and showing your value add is so important.
Okay, cool. That's a really good answer. It's very open-ended then, I guess. Yeah, like a lot of networking, and that's really interesting that you just got a LinkedIn message that somebody just like chanced it. Well, I don't know. They obviously have a great company as well, but that somebody can just get in contact that easily.
Yeah, and I will say, like, for 99% of cases, it's probably a much more useful exercise to actually get someone to introduce you, because, like, as Vav mentioned, you're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of companies every year. And if I'm like, even if I started a startup now, I would be looking at every advantage to make sure my email was read. So obviously, if I wanted to invest in Elkstone to invest in my startup, I would know people, and I'd also know, like, Vav and ACT. But if I was going to London, I'd be looking at who do the people in this company know that I know who can introduce me, because, like, there's thousands of companies looking to be one of your 10 deals a year.